I've discovered recently that enlightenment isn't all it's cracked up to be. The downside to having a moment of enlightenment is you can never see things again as you used to, no matter how much you might want to. A couple of weeks ago, in my struggle with wisdom for dummies, I shared my newly gained awareness that the wisdom Jesus didn't see his mission as saving us, but as raising our consciousness. He was a spiritual teacher, calling us to life-giving awareness, not a sacrificial lamb paying the price for our sins. Specifically, he sought to move us from a world seen dualistically, where everything is black and white, good or bad, to a unitive world where everything is singular. In this new world, it's not me and everything else. There is just everything and no me. Our human task is to no longer differentiate the world into its parts, but to integrate the parts, including ourselves, into a whole. I seriously doubt I will ever grasp that concept. I am running double time to keep up with this wisdom teacher, and I'm still being left in the dust. But I'm in good company. With the possible exceptions of Mary Magdalene and Thomas, the disciples didn't get him either, and neither did Paul or the writers of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, or the early church fathers, and neither did the Western church that shaped me. However, I get enough of it to know that I hear today's gospel with new ears. My problem is, I was happy enough with how the old ones heard it. As someone who by nature is not reluctant to test boundaries, I'm heartened by Jesus' response to the Pharisees' objection to his disciples eating without washing their hands. Since, as good Jews, swine flu was hardly their concern, this wasn't about good hygiene. It was about ritual purity. Jesus was challenging a system of rules intended to separate people. It put people into groups, clean or unclean, saints or sinners, insiders or outsiders, powerful or powerless. I hear his response as a clarion call for justice and inclusiveness, and so it is. But I now find his charge of hypocrite leveled at the Pharisees leveled at me as well. While I champion his message in one breath, in the next I condemn with enthusiasm those who oppose my own standards, separating myself from them by labeling them homophobes, fundamentalists, bigots, or Republicans. Before chapter 1 of Wisdom for Dummies, I could live with that. I could nurse past grievances of injustice with relish and long with self-righteousness for a day when justice reigns. Not anymore. I can still do it. I just can't enjoy it like I once did. So it's time to read chapter 2. This chapter focuses on my propensity to cling. I cling to past wrongs and injustices. I cling to my hopes for a better world. I cling to my ego, invested in being a progressive Christian, calling for justice. The problem is Jesus, the master of consciousness, demonstrated in his life that clinging prevents being. Clinging prevents being. Letting go is part and parcel of letting be. It is the creative act. We've heard that before. In Genesis, when God spoke, "Let there be," existence, our world tumbled into existence. What Jesus challenges us to create by letting go to let it be is the kingdom of heaven. What I'm coming to think of as the holy now. It is the conscious act of living fully and only in the moment. Dragging the past and worrying about the future won't get me there. In fact, not living in the now is at the root of all that, in the words of today's gospel, defiles us. As an example, let me tell you a story about two monks. They're traveling together. Both are sworn to strict celibacy that prohibits any interaction with the opposite sex. They come to a deep river and see a woman standing beside it, obviously desperate to get across, but unable to swim. One of the monks simply slings her on his back and swims her across. When they reach the other side, the woman goes her way and the monks continue on theirs. 2 hours later, the first monk notices that his brother is silently fuming. "How could you have done that?" the second explodes. "You are under vows never to touch a woman. Do your vows mean nothing to you? Don't you care that you have contaminated yourself?" "My brother," replied the first, "I picked her up and put her down, and you're still carrying her." At this point, let me clarify a difference between traditional wisdom streams and the radical wisdom offered by Jesus. The former see the path away from dualism to singularity as one of renunciation. Push things away from you. Just say no to anything that distracts you from higher consciousness or might contaminate you. It is the path of the ascetic. It can work for a few, those who can do it. But for most of us, we have to live in the world. We have to get our hands dirty. If it weren't for Jesus, we could excuse ourselves then from the inconvenience of seeking higher consciousness. But Jesus, except for his brief time in the wilderness before beginning his ministry, was no ascetic. He was no John the Baptist, wearing animal skins and eating bugs. He embraced everything and everyone, but took nothing for his own profit. Quite the opposite. He extravagantly gave all he had. And when it was time to let go, he did it with the same freedom he had shown in the embrace. He had no trouble getting his hands dirty in the messiness of life. In doing so, he took all of our excuses away. Living life fully and generously without clinging to it is to live in the holy now.